Thanks everybody for coming out. This is the second historical marker in conjunction with Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission that's going to be on location here at the Harrisburg headquarters building of the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. The prior one was for the Ralph Abel marker. This one historically is occurring here on 150th year, the agency year that is. So thank you very much for coming out. If you want to turn to your programs, we're going to follow this in order here. And we're going to start out with presentation of colors by the Fish and Boat Commission Honor Guard. Please stand. We will now have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission Executive Director, John A. Arway.
Thanks, Ted. It's really been a momentous year for the Fish and Boat Commission, and we'd like to welcome you today as we continue to celebrate our 150th anniversary and commemorate the founding of our agency with the placement of this historical marker. Many thanks to Jim Vaughn, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission, and Frederick Powell, PHMC Commissioner, for their approval of the marker and their support for the continued celebration during this historical year. I would also like to thank Dr. Ken Walensky for his exceptional work on our history book to protect, conserve, and enhance the history of the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, which is available for sale at the front counter. And thanks also go out to all the Fish and Boat Commission current and past staff for their contributions to our history, and a special thanks to Ted Walk, who's done a yeoman's job with his contributions to and editing of the history book, as well as being the chief engineer for today's event. We began the celebration on March 30th with a special event at the State Museum with past and current leaders of conservation telling their story about the past. We were also inspired by our future leaders who explained their vision for the future. We met this summer with our partners at our new Center Region office and celebrated the history of Fisherman's Paradise and Spring Creek. Several weeks ago, we were in Erie, the fishing capital of Pennsylvania, and we were hosted by the Sons of Lake Erie to celebrate the wonders of our Great Lake and Presque Isle Bay. We hosted 2 national meetings attended by our nation's leaders in fish and wildlife, one in Pittsburgh and one in Philadelphia, and we had the privilege to tell our story as the second oldest fish or wildlife agency in our entire country. Today's placement of the historical marker will be followed by a dedication ceremony of our newly renovated Reynoldsdale Fish Hatchery in Bedford County, a meeting of the Council of Great Lakes Committees in Erie later this fall. Who knows what 2017 will bring, since the party isn't over until the clock strikes midnight on March 29th and we begin our 151st year. Perhaps we can celebrate a gift of new authority to set our own license fees. Right, Representative Gillespie and Representative Mull? When planning my talk for today, I wanted to focus on a special topic from the past that would serve as our path forward to the future. I believe that Article 1, Section 27 of our Pennsylvania Constitution is the one unifying theme that we can leave to future generations to continue the legacy of the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. And special recognition goes to Franklin Curry and his wife, Mrs. Curry, who sit in the front row, for their work on constructing the article. Now it's our job to carry it out. I would like to explain what the article means to me in much the same way Red Skelton told the story about one of his teachers explaining to him as a young schoolboy the words and meaning of the Pledge of Allegiance that we just did. The people, a plurality of persons considered as a whole, which includes all 12 million of us who are citizens of our great Commonwealth, have a right, in accordance with what is good or proper, in conformity with fact, reason, truth, or some standard of principle. The recent Supreme Court opinion clarified that our environmental rights are just as important as our political and civil rights. The Environmental Rights Amendment speaks to the rights of the people. Have a right to clean air safe to breathe and absent of pollutants that can impact our health and well-being. Pure water. Nearly 1 billion people around the world suffer needlessly without access to safe, clean water to drink. Safe, potable water free of disease, pathogens, or unacceptable levels of pollution. Water clean enough to support the fishable, swimmable goal of the Clean Water Act in all our Commonwealth's waterways. And to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment, to keep all of our natural resources safe from harm. Pennsylvania's public natural resources, those are our broad biodiversity and geodiversity that exists naturally in our Commonwealth, relatively undisturbed by man. Things such as our air and our wind, our water and our soils, our rocks, our forests, and our fish and wildlife are the common property of all the people. Real property owned by us, the tenants in common, who each have an undivided interest in the entire property of our Commonwealth, belonging to each and every one of us, including generations yet to come, even our children yet to be born. As trustee of these resources, those of us in state government who hold power for property or authority are in a position of trust or responsibility for the benefit of the general public. We are the trustee for your property, and you are the beneficiary of that trust. The Commonwealth, a political community founded for the common good, a state in which the supreme power is invested in the people. We are a state which sovereign power is invested in representatives chosen by the people to govern, and government is the people, and it's from the people to the leaders, not from the leaders to the people. Shall conserve, to prevent injury, decay, waste, or loss of our natural resources, or keep things in a safe and sound state, and maintain them, to keep them in an existing condition and not allow further degradation. For the benefit, a good or helpful result, an improvement of our general well-being as a society, of all the people, all of us. It's as much your property as it is mine. Herbert Hoover once said, all men are equal in the eyes of fish. So we'd like to thank all of you for attending today's ceremony and for your support of the mission of the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Well, if anything, with regard to the road noise along here and stuff, is a good indication that the marker is going to be seen, at least. Next speaker we have here on the program is Dr. Kenneth Walensky. As John had indicated, he was the author of our history book, and he's actually been critical to a lot of the things we've been doing throughout the year, a lot of the events and such, and keeping us on track with our own history. Dr. Walensky?
Thank you, Ted. And Ted has done a yeoman's job, really, in designing the history book, and he was very good to work with. I've known Ted for quite a few years, and it was a pleasure to work with him again. And the quality of the book is really reflected in the quality of Ted's work. You know, when I when I wrote the book, John just said that the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission was the second in the nation. when I wrote the book, I tried to sneak in there that the Fish and Boat Commission was the first in the nation, in the hopes that it would make the New York Times bestseller list. But they caught me, and they corrected it to say that it was the second in the nation. So that didn't work. You know, Pennsylvania is the home to many conservation leaders, past and present. Historical markers recognize people like Myra Lloyd Dock and Horace McFarland, who were leaders not only in Pennsylvania but across the nation in the City Beautiful movement, in greening urban areas, in fighting for clean water and clean air, pretty much before their time. There, of course, was Maurice Goddard, who was the head of the Department of Environmental Resources, and prior to that, head of the Department of Forest and Waters, whose name is well known, I think, among many of you. And of course, there was Ralph Abel, whose state historical marker is right over there, and many of you worked with Ralph or remember Ralph in some way. A very, very important person. The mission of the commission that John just mentioned, as the book title is, it says to preserve, protect, and enhance. What John says in the book is that the original mission of the agency was to mitigate water pollution and depletion of shad. He goes on to say that our mission today has changed a bit from our original one, but we are still focused on protecting, conserving, and enhancing our aquatic resources and providing fishing and boating opportunities. In addition to the people that I just mentioned, Myra Lloyd Dock and Horace McFarland and Maurice Goddard and Ralph Abel, there's another person who would really agree with that mission, as John states it in the book, and that person is former Governor Gifford Pinchot, whose name would probably ring a bell with many of you. Governor Pinchot was governor in the 1920s and again in the 1930s, and he was one of the nation's pioneering conservationists. And he was also known internationally. He studied in France about forestry and conservation. So Pinchot was well before his time when it came to conservation. And here's what Gifford Pinchot, as I was preparing for today's remarks, I thought I would read a couple of very brief quotes from Gifford Pinchot in a book that was published in 1909 about conservation, over 100 years ago. Gifford Pinchot said this: "What does conservation stand for?" He said, "The central thing for which conservation stands is to make this country the best possible place to live in, both for us and for our descendants. It stands against the waste of natural resources which cannot be renewed, and it stands for the perpetuation of the resources which can be renewed, like food-producing soils and forests, wildlife and fish, and most of all, it stands for equal opportunity for every American citizen to get his fair share of the benefit from these resources, both now and hereafter." He concludes by saying, "Conservation is the most democratic movement this country has ever known. It holds that the people not only have the right, but the duty to control the use of natural resources, which are the greatest sources of our prosperity. And it regards the absorption of these resources by special interests as a moral wrong. Conservation is the application of common sense to the common problem for the common good, and I believe it stands nearer to the desires, aspirations, and purposes of the average man, and I would add woman, than any other policy now before the American people." He said that in 1909, and it certainly rings true today. I think you would agree. If Gifford Pinchot were here today, he'd be proud to stand with you to dedicate this historical marker. He'd be pleased because he was a leading conservationist, and this is an agency whose mission is all about conservation, both historically and in the past. What would he be pleased with? I think Pinchot would be pleased that the Fish and Boat Commission deals with the issue of dams on our rivers and how those dams impede the passage of fish, such as shad. He would be pleased that the Fish and Boat Commission is all about clean water and is a strong advocate for clean water throughout the Commonwealth. Poor water quality, the Fish and Boat Commission recognizes, as Pinchot did 100 years ago, not only impacts aquatic life, but impacts human life as well and can be detrimental to human life. I think he'd be pleased that the Fish and Boat Commission establishes and manages some stellar fish hatcheries throughout the Commonwealth, state of the art in many, many cases. He'd be happy with that. Gifford Pinchot would be happy that the Fish and Boat Commission has several innovative programs, such as the Fish for Free Day and the Mentored Youth Trout Day program. Gifford Pinchot would be pleased with the Commission's law enforcement capabilities, as we see it here today demonstrated with the showing of the colors. He'd be very pleased with the management of the agency and the operation of the agency, from its commission to its leadership to its employees, who do a wonderful job in carrying out its mission. And finally, he would be pleased that the Fish and Boat Commission is dedicated to the larger call of Article 1, Section 27 of the Commonwealth's 1968 Constitution, which Representative Curry, former Representative Curry, played a very key role in that constitutional amendment, and I think it's worth reading it. The people have a right to clean air, pure water, and to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the Commonwealth. Pennsylvania's public natural resources are the common property of all the people, including generations yet to come. As trustees of these resources, the Commonwealth shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all the people. That was very important in 1968 and visionary for the present day and for the future. Today, with the dedication of this historical marker, the Fish and Boat Commission joins the ranks of over 2,000 PHMC historical markers that recognize people, places, and events and organizations, some of whom were active in Pennsylvania's conservation and environmental protection movement in the past. You know, we're here to make history, to mark history, but by no means is the agency's mission history. It's very, very relevant today. You know, so often we relegate history to the history books and to the archives, as I was talking to Commissioner Powell about earlier. We relegate it to those types of things, but the reality is that history lives. History lives today, and we're recognizing that there's a living agency in that building and throughout the Commonwealth that, yes, made history, but continues to make history and has a mission well off into the future. No doubt Gifford Pinchot would be pleased to be here today and would be pleased with what the agency does and with the placement of this marker. And he concluded this essay by saying this, very simply. He said, "The waters will continue to flow. The waters will continue to flow." And indeed, they will with the help of this agency. Thank you very much.
As both Dr. Walensky and Executive Director John Arway had indicated, this is one of a number of events this year during our 150th anniversary. And I recommend that you go into the Fish and Boat Commission's website, fishandboat.com. It's just been newly designed. But there you'll find a web page dedicated to the 150th anniversary. Once this program is completed, we will have a video of this presentation up, but that's one of many along with historical documents there. So I really heartily recommend you go in there for the full context of both in terms of what the speaker's remarks are conveying in terms of the importance of the agency, but also kind of a recap in terms of what we've done this year. Next, we're very, very fortunate to have Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission Commissioner Frederick Powell present. He was actually present for the 2012 historical marker presentation, which we had for the Ralph Abel historical marker, and we're so fortunate to have him here today.
The last words I hear from my family when I go to one of these events is stick to your notes. They don't want to know all the other things you want to tell them. I really feel an alliance and allegiance to the Fish and Boat Commission, partly because of Ralph Aubel, whom I never met. But he was a farm boy from western Pennsylvania, which I was. He grew up as a Boy Scout and was a scout leader, which I was. He was a member of the Chesapeake Bay Alliance, and I'm a member of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And we both commanded companies in the 3rd Armored Division. And I've got this right here, so that's the evidence. There really was a sense of kinship when I was here and we dedicated the other marker. So now I'll try to stick to my notes. We do bring greetings on behalf of the governor, and my colleagues, 2 of them are in the audience also, on behalf of the Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission. I've been fortunate to spend more than half my life in Pennsylvania. I spent time overseas with the United States Army on 2 lovely occasions, and but I came from Meadville, Pennsylvania. My great-great-great-great-grandfather was a friend of Chief Cornplanter, and Chief Cornplanter owned the only Indian land in Pennsylvania. We never had a reservation in Pennsylvania, so he was one of the few Indians who actually owned land. Both sets of my grandparents were farmers in western Pennsylvania. So it's important to me that we pay attention to these Pennsylvania markers. They're a critical element in telling us, educating us about our history. And the good news is that they're usually located at the site where the history took place. So when you're on that site, it gives you a perspective that you wouldn't have in a book or pictures. Because these markers are so important, I'm now going to read you the list of 2,000 markers around the state. Actually, I do hope that you stop and pay attention to them. When you drive by them, you see them. Oftentimes we see that same marker. I've done this myself. You drive a route every day and you look and you see that marker and you get used to seeing it and you never stop and read it. Take the time. It tells the history of our state. So on behalf of our fellow commissioners, we appreciate the fact that you worked through the process of making sure that we got the information so that we could approve the marker. Actually, most of the markers requested are rejected because there isn't enough historical evidence to indicate why we should have another marker. The over 2,000 are very valuable, but each new one does require maintenance, and it requires us to look at it and make sure that it has an historic perspective. So, I'm going to read this to you. I think this is some of us will read it right, take the time and read it afterwards, but I'm going to read it to you right now. Governor Andrew G. Curtin signed an act of March 30, 1886, establishing a commission to improve water quality and restore migratory fish passage. It serves as a leader for national initiatives, including state fish hatcheries and environmental and habitat protection regulations and law enforcement. The agency protects, conserves, and enhances Pennsylvania's aquatic resources and provides fishing and boating opportunities. That's what it says. And now, if you'll join with me and the Fish and Boat Commission and the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission in dedicating this sign, would you all say yes? Let's do it. Thank you.
Okay, right before we do that, we are also fortunate to have a presenter in our audience here, State Representative Keith Gillespie. Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission was unable to be with us today, but we are very fortunate to have our 47th Legislative District.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. After that build-up, I'm going to stand between you and the unveiling of the sign. So, but it is an honor to be able to pitch in for Executive Director Vaughn couldn't make it today. I chair the House Game and Fish Committee. I've done so for the last 20 months, and I've sat on the House Game and Fisheries Committee for the last 14 years. Not every day, but probably at least every week, I have the opportunity to interact either with the Executive Director Arway, Tim Schaefer, the Legislative Liaison Director, or maybe Darren Gephardt, who's holding the American flag over there as part of the Honor Guard. And never have I ever had the opportunity to work with such individuals of the professional nature and caliber that the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission has. It's just been an extreme honor. John sort of joked a little earlier about Senate Bill 1168, which is sitting in the House of Representatives right now, which would give the commission the authority to set their own licensing fees. And I think it's high time that we get that done. The Senate passed it 48-2, and I encourage each and every one of you, when you leave here, to either send an email or pick up the phone and call your member of the House of Representatives and encourage them to have this Senate bill brought up for a vote so that we can get this agency the fees that they need. So with that, let's go ahead and get this thing unveiled, and thank you so much for the opportunity to spend a moment with you.
Okay, that pretty well concludes our ceremony today. Just to give you some background on the marker, these things don't happen instantaneously. It required a nomination form to be completed by the agency, and probably took well over 2 years till we actually to this date and such. And the process, as Commissioner Powell indicated, is pretty rigorous in terms of a panel of historians reviewing the nomination form. Fortunately, they do give a reprieve to come back and revise the form, which I was able to do. But we got it approved, and it is not an instantaneous process, but we're in an honored cadre of historical organizations and notes and such. So thank you for today's coming out today's ceremony and such. Again, as John had indicated, the book, the history book of the agency, is for sale at the front desk of our headquarters building, as well as if you turn to the back of the program, we give you all the information to get it, because this is just the tip of the iceberg here. Thank you very much.